Beis, page 14b. And yesterday, we learned that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai gave another reason why the order of the Parshios of Shema are the way they are. So again, there are 3 chapters of the Shema prayer. And there must be a reason why they are recited in the order they are, in the order that we recite them, because in the Torah, they aren't written in that order. The 3rd paragraph in the Torah is actually before all of them. But when we recite them, we recite the 1st and 2nd paragraph, and only afterwards do we recite the 3rd paragraph. So why are they recited in this order? And the Gemara is really questioning maybe the 2nd paragraph should be first also. Even though it's written afterwards, Tosfos told us that the logic behind that is that because it's in the plural, it maybe has more, deserves a certain amount of priority. And therefore, maybe the 2nd paragraph should even be first. If you read the 2nd paragraph of the Shema, you'll see that a lot of the statements in it are plural. In the 1st paragraph, it's singular. And it's written, spoken to the individual. The 2nd paragraph is spoken to the community, the communal. So therefore, the 2nd paragraph maybe should even go first. So Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai gives his reason. The Gemara initially understands it the way he says it, understands it, and questions it. Because the way he said it was that the 1st paragraph of the Shema is all about studying. The 2nd paragraph of Shema is about teaching. And the 3rd paragraph of Shema is about doing. So he said that's the reason for the order. But the Gemara questions that. Does anyone remember what the question on that was?
Yeah, in each one of the paragraphs, it talks about one of the other topics as well.
Thank you, Ezra.
And so therefore the question is, why do you do it the way you do it? And so therefore the discussion is then throughout that paragraph number 1 actually talks about 1, 2, and 3. Paragraph number 2 talks about 1 and 2. And then paragraph number 3 talks about number 1, where we're talking about learning, teaching, doing. The next one is learning and teaching, and the 3rd one is just the doing. So it's
action. Correct. Thank you, Ezra. So the Gemara asked that how could you say that the reason for the 1st one to go that it's first is it's only teaching, it's only studying. It's not only studying; it also includes the others. And so the 2nd paragraph as well, it has a few things. So therefore, the Gemara explains that that's not what Reb Shimon ben Yochai meant. Reb Shimon ben Yochai meant that the 1st one has all 3, like Ezra just explained to us, and therefore that deserves to go first. And the 2nd paragraph has only 2 of those, and that is the it's Lelamed. The 2nd paragraph of Shema is Lelamed and Lasos. It's teaching and doing because it has Upshartim as well, tying your tefillin, putting on the mezuzah. And Vayomer only has the doing, and therefore it's last. So the Gemara then asks a question about Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha's statement in our Mishnah. Does anyone know what that question is? So we have Reb Shimon ben Yochai who just explained to us the order of the Shema, and somehow there's some problem with what he says based on the fact that we heard something from Rabbi Yeshua, we learned something from Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. Does anyone know what the question is?
Was that about why did he put the tefillin on after he said the Shema?
No. That was that. No. That's a different story. before we get to that, we're a little few lines before that that story. So the question that the Gemara asks is, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha in the Mishnah said a different reason. So what is Reb Shimon ben Yochai? Is he arguing on Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha? So the Gemara answers that really he agreed. They both agree. He just adds an additional reason. So the Gemara wanted to clarify if he really agrees with Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha's point. Again, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha in our Mishnah emphasized that the first paragraph of Shema is all about accepting the yoke of heaven, and the second paragraph of Shema was accepting the yoke of the mitzvahs. And he said that the third paragraph of the Shema does not apply at night. And therefore, that's the order of the Shema. It's the first paragraph is more general, and it's accepting the yoke of heaven. Also deserves priority because of that. And second paragraph is accepting the yoke of mitzvahs. Third paragraph doesn't apply at night, therefore it loses that priority that it should always that it's and therefore it's placed third in that order. So the Gemara said that really Reb Shimon ben Yochai also agrees with that. Then the Gemara said the story that Edith just mentioned, that Rav washed his hands and recited the Shema and put tefillin on and davened. And of course, the question is, how did he do such a thing? You're supposed to put tefillin on first and then say the Shema. And this is a question that the Gemara asks based on a brisa. But the Gemara is stuck first explaining the brisa, and then it'll explain how to reconcile what Rav did. First, it has to deal with the brisa itself. There's an internal problem with that brisa. It seems to contradict itself, because first it says that when a person is digging, they would dig a grave in a cave. They would dig out from the wall of the cave. Further in the wall, they would dig graves. That's the way that was the custom then. And so they were digging this grave, and the people who were digging it are exempt. So first it says they're exempt from everything on all mitzvahs. And then it says when it comes time for the Shema, you got to go and wash your hands and put the tefillin on and read Shema and daven. So are you exempt or are you not exempt? It seems like a contradiction. So first we got to answer that contradiction. Then we can get back to our problem with Rav, that he put tefillin on after he said Shema and davened with his tefillin, but he didn't say Shema with his tefillin. So we're going to get to that problem after. First, we got to reconcile this contradiction. A person who's digging a grave, are they exempt for Shema and tefillah and tefillin or not? It's a contradiction within this statement. In the same paragraph, it contradicts itself. Yes, Susan.
Isn't it true that the people who are digging the grave, they're not Jewish during present times? Well,
it should be that they're Jewish. Now, it is considered a honor that, Jewish people, we bury our own. Now, nowadays, it's not fully done that way, but there is actually one cemetery here in Florida where they actually have Jewish people specifically to do the work, because it's considered an honor, to. So in any event, the case we're talking about is that they were Jewish.
Okay.
And the people that were digging were Jewish, and they should say the Shema, except they might be exempt because it's more important to concentrate on the burial. Although here in the Brisa we have a contradiction. One place it says they're exempt, and one place it says they're not exempt. So what is the Gemara's answer? Does anyone remember? Yes, Howard. You're muted. We can't hear you, Howard.
Oh, Sorry. I think the answer was, it depends if it's just the person himself or he has somebody helping him.
Right. So if there's two people, so they could one could continue working, the other one can go and recite the Shema and Shema Esrei, put tefillin on, say Shema, daven, and so on. Correct. And the other case was where there's only one person, and therefore he's not supposed to stop. He's supposed to continue doing his work and forget about the Shema and the tefillin and Shema Esrei, and just keep on work, do the mitzvah that you're involved in. And that was the Gemara's answer to this contradiction.
Rabbi,
Just one second. I should mention that in the Shulchan Aruch, when it talks about this halacha, it actually says that even two people are exempt. And what we're talking about here is when only one person can do the work at a time. So for example, if there's only one shovel, then the other one goes and davens and so on, and then comes back. But even two people would both be exempt really for doing it. So that's like delving a little deeper into the reason behind the law that's stated here, which comes out a difference in halacha. Because what happens if there's two people? Are they exempt or not? There are cases where they would be exempt, both of them. Even though the Gemara sounds like it's only if there's one person is he fully exempt, but two people aren't exempt. It's not exactly so. If there's two shovels, then they are not. They do not stop. They both keep on working. They're both exempt from the Shema. Okay, let's see. We have two questions here. Robert, I can't hear you.
The question I have is, if the gravedigger is exempted from doing the Shema, is a precedent because, again, the importance of doing mitzvot. And for us, having somebody buried as soon as possible is our philosophy. But part of it is because of that, then you sit Shiva, because we have the 30-day time when the soul is elevated to heaven, to Hashem. So because of that, because of the necessity of burying somebody and then to be able to sit Shiva for that person to then be elevated, his or her soul, is that part of the rationale for not being exempted from doing Shema? Have you ever, is that a consideration of the exemption for doing Shema if there's only one gravedigger?
Because we're in a rush to bury our dead.
We need to bury our dead as soon as possible. Clearly before Shabbos, right? But as soon as possible.
Right. But I don't know if you have to go that far.
Okay, I just wanted to understand.
In other words, that is correct. It is correct that we have to, that there's a mitzvah that a person should not be left overnight unburied. And therefore, we go to extreme measures to try to do a burial as soon as possible. And only if it's to honor the deceased will we push off the burial for another day. Maybe relatives are coming or, which would be an honor for them. But otherwise, we try to do the burial the same day. But I don't know if you need to go that far when it comes here that to say person is exempt. The reason why a person is exempt is because they are involved in one mitzvah. And being involved in a mitzvah, we learned on page 11 that when you're involved in a mitzvah, you're exempt from other mitzvahs. And it's based on the verse, B'shivtecha b'veisecha, that when do you say Shema? Only when you're sitting in your house. But when you're doing a mitzvah, you don't have to say Shema. So therefore, the mitzvah of burial takes precedence. And if you finish the digging and so on before the time of Shema ends, fine, then you'll say Shema. But in the meantime, you're busy with this mitzvah. This is the mitzvah that you should be involved in. So I don't know if you need to come to the fact that we're in a rush to do the burial. I think just the fact that you're involved in a mitzvah is enough. Yes, Ben, thank you for waiting patiently.
I think I saw that if your helper was supposed to bring your tefillin and he didn't bring him in time, but you could still say Shema, if you say it immediately, then you say Shema, and when he brings that tefillin, that's when you put him on.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. So there's a lot of discussion about this. There's a further Mishnah later on.
Not to miss.
I think
not
we'll
to
deal
miss
with
the
it. This,
time of Shema.
right. This isn't really the place of discussing the person who's involved in digging and
Okay, I
who's exempt.
know I read it.
But yeah, there is a Mishnah which I think you're referring to. So in any event,
Maybe
our
I read
Gemara.
too far, I don't know.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you just said, Ben.
I said maybe I read too far. Maybe I went too far.
Right. Okay, don't worry. So the Gemara is now dealing with the problem that we mentioned. Rav washed his hands, said Shema, and then put tefillin on and davened. And the fact that this brisa emphasizes washing your hands and putting tefillin on, then saying Shema, and then davening. So again, it seems to contradict what Rav did. Rav did Shema without tefillin, and this brisa seems to emphasize saying Shema with tefillin on. So the Gemara answers, what is the first answer the Gemara tries to give? The Gemara wants to say that Rav argues the Gemara wants to say that Rav holds like Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha. Now, how does that answer the question? If Rav holds like Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha, again, Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha said that you first accept the yoke of heaven, and then you accept the yoke of the mitzvahs. Now, how does that help if you say Shema before putting tefillin on? How does that fit with Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha? Yes, Howard.
Putting on tefillin is a mitzvah, so I would think the idea is first you have to accept the yoke of mitzvahs, and then you would do a mitzvah.
Right.
So first you say Shema, and then you put on tefillin.
Okay, so good, very good. So that's what the Gemara tries to say, that Rav is doing exactly like Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha. You first accept the yoke, say Shema. Now, after you accept the yoke, okay, it's time to do the yoke of mitzvahs. Let's do tefillin. So maybe that's the reason of Rav. So the Gemara says that doesn't fit, because Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha was talking about when you speak about accepting the yoke of heaven and you speak about accepting the yoke of mitzvahs, first you say the yoke of heaven with words, and then you accept the yoke of mitzvahs with words. But Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha was not talking about when you have a mitzvah to do. So when you have a mitzvah to do, he wasn't dealing with that. He was talking about reciting or saying words that are going to be accepting this yoke and accepting that yoke, and this yoke comes before that yoke. But he's not talking about when it comes to action. When it comes to action, put tefillin on and then say Shema. Doesn't mean that you can't you can't put tefillin on and have tefillin on when you're accepting the yoke of heaven. And then so that's one problem. And furthermore, the Gemara says, does he really hold like Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha? Because we find that he used to study Torah, teach Torah before he put tefillin on and before he said Shema. So if he taught Torah before he did the Shema, you see clearly he didn't accept the yoke of heaven before he did mitzvahs. He did mitzvahs before he accepted the yoke of heaven because he taught Torah. So you see that he doesn't really follow anyway, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karfa. So the Gemara says, well, it could be that he taught Torah before the time came to say the Shema, and therefore you don't have a proof. Maybe he always accepted the yoke of heaven first. Here, he taught Torah because it wasn't yet time to accept the yoke of heaven. And that's why he taught Torah first. But really, he follows Rabbi Yeshua ben Karfa. So you don't have a full-fledged proof, maybe. So the Gemara says, no, you do have a proof. Because if so, if it wasn't the time yet, so why is the Brisa telling us this law? It must be telling us the law specifically to tell us that he would teach Torah, even though the time of Shema came, he would still teach Torah first. Because if it wasn't the time to say Shema yet, so what's the big deal? Of course he taught Torah, and then he said Shema. It wasn't the time yet to say Shema. What's the Brisa telling? It must be telling us it's a time to say Shema, and yet he didn't say Shema first. He first taught Torah, and then later, when it came, before the time ended of Shema, that's when he recited the Shema. So that's obvious. So therefore, you see clearly he doesn't follow Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. So the Gemara proves that wrong, and it says, not exactly. It could be that it's really not yet the time to say Shema. And what it's trying to tell us, that he recited the Brochos of the Torah, and then he taught Torah, that even for Mishnah, you need to say the blessings on the Torah. In other words, even though you're not just studying the Chumash, even for Mishnah, you got to say the blessings on the Torah. That's what it's trying to tell you. So really, it's not yet the time for Shema. And therefore, we don't know if he holds like Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. And nevertheless, the Brisa is coming to tell you something else. Not that he's arguing on Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, but maybe it's because it's telling you that you don't need that. You do need to say the blessings of the Torah before you teach Torah, even though you're only teaching Mishnah, you're not teaching Chumash. You still need to say the blessings on the Torah. So nevertheless, so what are we stuck with? We're stuck with a question that why did Rav do what he did? And you can't really answer that he follows Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, because Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha was not talking about action. He was talking about accepting the yoke of heaven by recital of Shema and recital of the yoke of accepting the yoke of the mitzvahs by words. And therefore, why did Rav do what he did? It doesn't seem that that's the appropriate order. We have a brisa that says the order should be tefillin first, and then Shema and Shemona Esrei. So why did Rav do what he did? So what's the final answer of the Gemara? The final answer of the Gemara is 3 words: Shlucha hu da'avis. What does that mean? It was his emissary that messed things up. In other words, his emissary came late. He didn't have his tefillin. He sent an emissary to go get his tefillin, and he came late with the tefillin, and the time of Shema had already come. It's about to be like the Zman of Kriya Shema is around, like, let's say 9:30, and it was 9:20, and the tefillin still hadn't arrived. So he said, you know what? I'm going to say Shema now, and that's it. I have no choice. Otherwise, I'm going to miss the time of Shema. So he said Shema at 9:20, and finished the Shema. And then when the tefillin came at 9:45, he put the tefillin on and he davened Shemona Esrei. And so that's the story of Rav. It was not something that he did regularly. It happened to be that way that he did that.
The accident. Yeah.
And the question that Tosfos deals with is, did he put tefillin on? He put tefillin on between Shema and Shemona Esrei. So is that the appropriate thing? Are you allowed to put tefillin on between Geula and Tefillah? Is that appropriate? So we have our siddur over here with the types of permitted interruptions. And one of the interruption is putting on the talus and putting on tefillin. So if you get your tefillin late, and this happens once in a while, you forgot your tefillin at home, you call your wife to go bring it, or you have someone who's finishing davening, let's say, in shul, and you ask them if you can borrow their tefillin. They say, well, in 5 minutes I'll be done, or 10 minutes. In the meantime, the minyan that you're with started davening. So should you start davening with them, and then when you reach the time when your friend finishes his tefillin, you could put it on maybe then, and then put the tefillin on. But the question also is, do you recite a bracha then in the middle of davening to putting tefillin on while you're in the middle of davening, or do you wait for the bracha later? So let's see what it says here. So if you're in the middle of the blessings of the Shema, so for the tefillin, it says you put it on, but you say the bracha between sections, or at any point after emes. Between the first two blessings, you could put it on with the bracha. From the Shema, Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad Baruch Shem Kvod Malchus L'Olam Vad, the two first sentences of Shema, you do not put it on. If you're in the middle of Shema and your tefillin comes, you don't put it on then. You finish saying Shema in Baruch Shem. And if you're between Goal Yisrael and the Amidah, you put it on, but you say the bracha after the Amidah. You say the bracha after Shemona Esrei. So you put it on, and after Shemona Esrei, you move it around to drop, and then say the bracha. And so that is somewhat connected, pretty much connected to this Tosfos over here in this Gemara, where it says that Rav said the Shema, and then he put his tefillin on, and he said Shemona Esrei. So we're assuming that he, that's allowed. And so what we see is, even if he said the bracha of Goal Yisrael, even if he said the final bracha before Shemona Esrei, he would put tefillin on right then. Just and the way it says in this siddur is that you would say the bracha after Shemona Esrei. Now Tosfos starts off saying that you would be allowed to put tefillin on at that point, and even a talus at that point. And he mentions that Reb Yitzchak, Reb Yehuda, once sent so, and after his talus, and he waited that when the shliach came, and he already said Shema and the blessings, and he put his talus on. He finished Shemona Esrei afterwards. So in other words, he had put the talus on in between the blessing of between the bracha of Goal Yisrael and the Shemona Esrei, and he brought a proof from here from Rav. However, Tosfos says maybe tefillin and talus is different, because tefillin is connected to Shema and Shemona Esrei, as we'll soon see in the next piece of Gemara. And tzitzis maybe is just an obligation of the garment. So therefore, maybe tzitzis you wouldn't prove from Rav's case, or talus. And then he brings at the end that Reb Moshe Mikutzi would say that it's not a proof at all about the bracha, because all you see is that he put tefillin on. But you could say that he put tefillin on without a bracha, and after Shemona Esrei, he would move them around and touch them and say the bracha on them. And this is enough. And you could also put your talus on, even if a person's hands are dirty, they could put their talus on, and after they put it on, they could wash their hands and say the bracha. So the conclusion of Tosfos seems to follow the way this siddur tells us that you would put the tefillin on, and after the Shemona Esrei, you could say the bracha on the tefillin. And again, this is really what Rav did. He put the tefillin on, and then he davened Shemona Esrei, and it's unclear from the Gemara when he recited the bracha but he definitely put it on. So that shows that you could put on the tefillin even in between the blessing of Gal Yisrael and the Shemona Esrei blessing. Okay, I'm sorry for taking up a few extra minutes of your time. If any of you would like to
Rabbi.
ask any questions,